Hello, Changemakers. Welcome to today's Hangout. To launch the Unilever Sustainable Living Young Entrepreneurs Awards for 2014, we want to talk about the power and importance of youth entrepreneurship in the changing world. The Hangout discussion will cover how young people can realize their potential as changemakers, and then the importance of breaking down the walls between business as usual and social entrepreneurs. And towards the end, we'll offer tips for young entrepreneurs who want to create social impact. Our Hangout panel today is a good one. We have Dr. Lisa Smith, Director at Unilever Ventures Limited. We have Dr. Nicky D, the University of Cambridge Institute for Sustainable Leadership Fellow. We have founder of FrontlineSMS, Launcher.net, and author of The Rise of the Reluctant Innovator, and also Neshoka Fellow Ken Banks. And we're also joined by 2013 awards finalist Curt Bowen, founder and executive director of Semilla. Some of the talking points we'll discuss today is why young people now more than ever seem to be committed to tackling climate change, sustainability issues, sort of becoming more dedicated to make the world a better place to work, live, and be. So with that said, what do you panel think that is the reason why young people are becoming greater advocates for sustainability issues, and what does it take?
Well, I'm happy to kick off before the thunderstorm takes my connection away. I think there's probably a few reasons today why we're seeing such an explosion, if that's the word you want to use, in the interest the younger people are taking in changing the world and making the world a better place. I think one of the main drivers has been the internet and social media, in that we're so much better connected today that awareness is so much higher. So it's difficult not to see what's going on for other people on the planet. It's difficult not to be more aware of the challenges, and I think people are just very, very open and receptive to using these tools to meet like-minded people, to make connections, to realize, in fact, that something that you would have had a few years ago, perhaps a career for life. I think this is probably the second thing, that the employment market is so different now that it's not really a risk to go out on your own and try to start something, whereas maybe 20 or 30 years it might have been. If you were working in a bank, for example, you probably would join in your teens and stay for most of your life. And if you didn't do that, then you'd almost certainly miss out. Today, that's very different. People stay in work far less amounts of time. There's much more fluidity in the job market. I think that, combined with social media and awareness, and also just this growing interest in how you can work for the greater good rather than just work for yourself, has driven this considerable and growing interest in the field. And it's all very good, much needed. There's plenty of problems to solve.
Absolutely. Maybe Curt, do you want to talk a little bit about that? I know you graduated in 2009 and moved to Guatemala. Did you just have a big idea because you started a company a year later? Now you're working with the Guatemalan government. So what was that journey like for you as a young entrepreneur?
Yeah, I think it was a really surprising one. I think that I actually fit in a lot of ways kind of the profile in Ken's book, The Reluctant Innovator, because there's questions about, there's this problem that you see, and all of a sudden you start getting really excited about it, you kind of get a little bit obsessed about it, and before you know it, you've been in Guatemala for 5 years, and your organization's actually being somewhat successful. And I think that really what it comes down to is this ability to kind of just like latch on to something, to say yes to something, and actually stick with it, even though it's hard, even though it's crazy, etc., etc. I think at a deeper social level, what's going on that makes that possible is that on one hand, I think young people have always been really interested in social change and doing something. I mean, it's just that the avenues for that are very different. If you go back 100 years ago, it was all about war and rising up social hierarchies. I mean, that was kind of like a playing field for how you could be a good, successful person. And I think that as our societies have all evolved a little bit, as we have more stable democracies, as we have less wars and all that good stuff, there's this question about, so what does it mean to live a really meaningful life, to live an exciting life, to live a heroic life? And I think that more and more people see getting involved in social change, getting involved in changing the world as one of the best ways that they can do that. And I think it's a really exciting time for humanity. So yeah, for me, it was a lot of just knowing that I was passionate about world causes, seeing stuff on the internet, seeing, being exposed to things, whether it's through debate in high school or other avenues, and then realizing that, you can get involved, you can directly get involved. And being able to Google other organizations and read their stories and see what they're doing, that's a huge part of it. That's one of the things that makes this so possible and so, kind of at your fingertips, is you see all these great organizations and you can go fly there and get involved. And so yeah, it's a really cool kind of confluence of different conditions that make this all really possible. I don't know, I'm really excited about other parts of the conversation today. To be like, what does it take to actually do it? How many people can get involved, etc.
Nicky, Lisa, anything you'd like to add there? I know that both of you spend a lot of time working with young, early-stage companies, running workshops with young entrepreneurs and innovators. You see a lot of young entrepreneurs getting into sustainability issues, and what's your advice to them? What do they come to you sort of asking and more about?
Okay, that was a lot of questions that you just threw at me there. Yes, absolutely. We're seeing a wonderful influx of entrepreneurs into the space, and entrepreneurs with a understanding that good business does not necessarily mean that you have to do bad by the planet. So, I mean, good business now is synonymous with looking after the planet and looking after people and workplace practices. But what I think is quite interesting is that we've got a confluence of a number of different things happening. One is the rate of change of innovation, and I think the outside world's acceptance of that rate of change is really different. If you wind the clock back about 15 years ago, if you wanted to do something very quickly, very rapidly, experiment, change, it was seen with a lot of suspicion. What are you trying to do? What's the angle? It was a lot of suspicion. But I think now there's a genuine acceptance that change can happen and can happen radically quickly. And I think that's a wonderful message to get down to the youth, because youth have that wonderful drive, energy, impatience, passion, like to see change and like to see things happen quickly. I think the other thing that's happened that's really good in terms of the ecosystem is that corporates and people with money, because I think youth often have wonderful resource in terms of time, ambition, passion, but not necessarily access to other resource. I think what's happened now is the corporate environment, the government environment has really understood that that this is a space that very, very worthy of investment. And I think taking that longer term view of let's look after the place in which we do business in its broadest sense, right from the people to the right through to the environment. So I think the confluence makes this really exciting times.
I'm not sure which of the questions I was supposed to respond to.
Yeah, I just take it away. I'd love to hear your thoughts, generally on what we've talked about so far. We haven't heard your voice yet.
Yeah, well, I think that I mean, I wear various different hats, and if you just indulge me for a moment with my academic hat on slightly, you see when you look back in history that there have been various different waves of activity, and very often when you get the most entrepreneurial sort of activity and endeavors is when you see an old established regime maximizing its opportunities and really narrowing down those opportunities. So and again you see the profit margins declining, and I think that we're living in a time where, unlike other what we call industrial revolutions, as it were, where you're looking at perhaps canals, railways, microelectronics, and so on, we're actually living in an age where people's perspective of the world has changed. And I think that for many young people, being engaged in social media and other online information sources, it's becoming harder and harder for young people to disconnect from their social concerns. And I think that's a really positive thing. combined with, I guess, people being jaded by some of the existing companies and the existing practices and the existing governance that we see, so that which really creates that ambition to do something new and try and change things. And as I said, I think it's much harder for young people to disconnect from some of those social concerns. And perhaps if we look back even 20 years, I think it was easier as people left the university environment to kind of just get into the treadmill of work and put some of those other social concerns to one side. So again, in this, I see that universities have had quite an interesting role. They've been changing their cultures from being quite, I guess, snobby about academic research and really looking at how that research is applied and trying to encourage a more entrepreneurial culture. So there's, as everyone's been saying, I think there's a variety of different things that are coming together. But from my perspective, in terms of sustainability and revolutionary activities that will actually disrupt industry and the way that we work, I think now we're in quite a prime time for that.
Yeah, and that leads me to my next question here. A lot of young people have good ideas or dreams about making a difference, but it doesn't seem like it's so easy, to get off their smartphone, get on the ground and actually launch an idea or a business or company that works with a purpose. So, in your experience, panel, how does a young person with a good idea and a real passion for social change turn that into something productive? I know, Ken, you wrote a book about this. What does it take? Does it take a degree in business? Does it take experience with social entrepreneurship projects? Does it even matter what you study at university, even though programs are changing? How does someone get started?
Yeah, so my personal experience and the experience of many people I've met along my own particular journey, which I suppose goes back about 20 years when I first started taking an interest in international development and the problems in the world. Many of the people I've met that have genuinely and meaningfully and sustainably created change have been the ones who have immersed themselves in the environments of the people they've tried to help. So I know empathy is a very big part of Ashoka's mission at the moment, and I think it's absolutely central to trying to figure out how you may or may not be of assistance to solving a particular problem. Sometimes the best contribution that you can make might be to do nothing, because you're better to do nothing than do harm. So the one word of caution I would say for some people is, before you do try to fix something, ask yourself whether you are the right person to do that, whether there's somebody better placed. And before you start something new, could you perhaps join somebody else who's already got some traction with their own idea, which maybe resonates with yours, and your impact actually might end up being through someone else. There is a slight overemphasis, I think, these days on being that lone champion for an idea, going out on your own, starting your own non-profit. You could probably argue there are enough non-profits in the world already, and that we maybe don't need any more, and collaboration is a word which is used a lot, but certainly there are great opportunities for collaboration which aren't always taken. So, in The Rise of the Reluctant Innovator and in the book, one of the key messages from there is that the people in that book weren't qualified to solve the problems that they solved. They found themselves in a situation where they saw a problem which disturbed them, upset them, riled them to such an extent that they ended up just dedicating their lives to fixing it. Later on, they learned the mechanics of how to do that. They learned the business plans, they learned the elevator pitches, they learned the funding techniques, they learned all of the technical stuff that you need to know in order to launch a startup, deciding what vehicle it is, equity, all those kind of things. They learned them later. The first thing is to find your passion. I think that's the absolute key, and probably the short answer to your question would have been that. Find something that gets you up in the morning and continues to get you up in the morning, not something that's just an interesting problem. There are plenty of interesting problems out there, but which one genuinely switches you on, and which one will take you through all of the hurdles and all of the pain, all of the heartache, all of the frustrations that you'll almost definitely go through in taking your idea to any kind of scale. So empathy, passion, they're probably the two most important things. Without those, you won't go very far.
Yeah, if I can add to that, I think you've raised an excellent point. And of course, what I used to see in entrepreneurship around 15 years ago was often the talk was about become an entrepreneur, make a lot of money. And it was sometimes quite challenging to speak against that and say, actually, many entrepreneurs, start with a passion and the money will flow. And I think we can particularly see that over the last few years. If you wanted to make serious amounts of cash and quickly, go into investment banking, don't be an entrepreneur. So, and I think the other danger at the moment is we see that entrepreneurs kind of attract a sort of celebrity status. And of course, we see many entrepreneur guru types on the front of various different magazines, whether it be Wired or more mainstream than that. And that absolutely does create the danger, as you were saying, Ken, that actually to make these ideas happen, and that's really the goal here, ideas are 10 a penny, but actually to make it happen, you do need to work with other people. And it's not just about having a mixed skill set. You actually need that support network. As you were saying, when times are tough, you need to hunker down as a team and really figure out how to overcome that hurdle and perhaps make some difficult decisions as to if you need to pivot your idea and change your focus slightly to make it happen.
Yeah, I want to add a couple of thoughts to that too, and I think that both of those sets of points were really, really good. I think that one of the big questions really comes down to failure. Are you, as an entrepreneur, willing to fail? And I work in Guatemala. We are in a city that is just filled with like all of these kids who come from universities. They just graduate, they have this idea, and they start this organization, put it on their website, and within a month, within 6 months, within a year, within 2 years, they're gone. It's like it's this cool faddish thing. Like before, it was traveling the world, and now it's like I'm going to start an organization. Country and everything's so cool, and they get this whole air about them, and and then years they're gone. And I think that it's really, really hard. When people come up to me and they ask me, I want to do something similar, I want to start my own organization, blah blah blah. I think that you have to really look at it and be like, do you have the kind of the tenacity actually to be stick with something? And a big piece of it is like, are you passionate enough about this issue that you can fail a couple times on it? Like you can maybe lose 2 years of your life, restart, lose another 2 years of your life, restart, and keep going. One of my board members is a serial entrepreneur, he's a tech entrepreneur, one of the few of them in Boise, Idaho, which is not known for tech entrepreneurs. And he started one successful company, 3 companies that didn't succeed as much as he wanted, and then 1 really successful one. And each one of those took him 10 years. It was like about a 50-year period of time to go through until he finally got the company he was really, really happy with. And I think that most people, it's like they see this as like this really cool thing. You can go after college and it's really glorious and you can be 28 and blah, 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 blah. And it's not that. I mean, what it really comes down to is, are you passionate enough about fixing systematic problems that you think that nobody else is paying attention to? That, I think, needs to be the question that you need to ask. And I think that everybody is right so far. What that means, what that requires is, 1, go and spend time with the people that you want to help. Like be a part of that community to enough of an extent that you actually get pretty good learning on what's going on and can see through a lot of stuff that's just not true. There's a lot of stories, especially in international development, that we all hold really dear about things that work and things that don't. You have to actually get on the ground and like really have a pretty good bullshit detector to see if they are going to fail or they're not going to fail, and really, spend time with them. And second, I think that to really facilitate that process, the systems level of thinking, is look at what everybody else is doing. What are other organizations doing? And if you spend enough time with other organizations, you can start to actually see what fails and what doesn't. And that might give you the idea of that entrepreneurial, that new thing that you could do that nobody else is doing yet. All of the really good entrepreneurs that I know, or at least a lot, not the stories, not like the Bill Gates and all those, but the ones that I personally know, all started in a company or they started working for someone else. And they spent a couple years doing that to get a feel for their field and how other big businesses and big organizations thought about it before they set out on their own. And I think that that's what's required, because really at the root of social entrepreneurship, the root of entrepreneurship in general, is being able to see the really big picture and see the specific thing that's not being thought of, and focus in on that, and be the person who's willing to spend 5, 10, 20 years of your life working on that one little piece until it finally breaks. And that's completely different than I think what everybody talks about with social entrepreneurship. You know, there was the president of IDE, I can't remember his name right now, gave a really great interview. He's like, there's all these incubators, there's all these they teach all these kids how to raise all this money into pitches before they actually know what the hell they're getting about. And I think that's a really, really important thing. It's like, how do we say with social entrepreneurship, get into the field, get some experience, learn about this issue really, really well, and see if you're actually going to be willing to make the jump. One of the biggest pieces of advice I got before I started back in 2009 was that you're doing this for 10 years on this. And I looked at them and I was like, I'll need people. And they were totally right. You know, we're in year 6 now and still working, just starting to get traction, just starting to actually get things done. And so I think that's the question: is are you really willing to put in that commitment on that issue? And if not, spend some time with some other organizations. You know, get really good experience and maybe figure out what the issues are.
I think Curt's hit the nail on the head there. It's a proper long journey, and I think that's something, if you if you play in the world of venture capital, you really do know that when you invest in a young startup, that's a relationship that lasts a good sort of 5 to 9 years. It's not a quick journey. And I'd echo what Curt says. It's tough. It's extraordinarily tough. And tenacity, I'm so glad you used that word, Curt, because that's the word that I'd use. I think passion isn't enough. If you don't have the backbone to pick yourself up after fall again, pick yourself up and fall, pick yourself up again. And Curt has got many fire stories to tell about this, but it's about that. It's about the ability just to believe, so that's where the passion comes in, but have that tenacity to stick it out and keep going. But I'd like to sort of just say to the less brave social entrepreneurs out there, we want you too. There's a place for you. You don't all have to be the superheroes, but you can do change within your organization. You can demand that your organization has fair trade practices, has good employment practices. You can call on your organization to make sure that their supply chain and that their suppliers are good. I mean, if you think what mass group action has delivered across the planet in the last 6 years, it's extraordinary. So there's no reason why we can't do that and harness that power and energy to do good from within. So I don't think we're saying if you're not the superstar person, you're not going to be part of this movement. I think we need everybody, and as Ken was just saying earlier, collaboration. You need a multi-set of skills, and it's a very arrogant person that thinks that they've got all the skills to deliver something. I know, Curt, you've got a fabulous team around you, and I think that's it. Find like-minded people that are equally passionate about you in the same space. And social media is wonderful to find that community, find that team. So I think now it's more easy than ever to find the team that is perfect for you and that you can join and you can help build momentum.
I just want to throw in one thing real quick, because I can't believe I didn't touch on that, because I think you're absolutely right. I mean, we wouldn't be anywhere near where we are right now. We didn't actually start getting successful until we found that good team. And I think that there's a lot of people who are like, I'm so passionate about poverty, I'm so passionate about agriculture, I'm so passionate about fill in the blank, but you know what, I'd actually like to have a salary, or I'd actually like to be able to raise a family, or there's like all of these things where it's just like, I don't want to be that one person, or I don't want to be working 80 hours a week every single day forever and ever and ever and ever, and and I think that it's important to recognize that, that those people are possibly more needed than the kind of crazy entrepreneurs, because the crazy entrepreneurs completely fail without them, and so I think it's really important, and that's just as like, if you look at any successful entrepreneur, you'll find 4 or 5 of those people at least behind them, and a whole organization is behind them. Being a part of a culture is such a great thing. Anyways, sorry, I just couldn't.
No, I think it's a very important point that there isn't one style of entrepreneur, and we've showed this in academia. But rather than go on about that, just look at Bill Gates versus Steve Jobs. I mean, totally different personalities. Who can name Richard Branson's business partner? You know, Richard Branson's clearly the guy out there, you know, raising the profile, doing a lot of talk. But you need a wide range of different personalities, and you can get very quiet. But very persistent entrepreneurs, and yeah, never ignore the quiet person in the room would be some of my advice. But in terms of the team building, I just thought it would be interesting to pick up on that, because it is such a critical point. And I've been doing a lot of work going around looking at various different sort of startup programs and spaces. And one of the trends that seems to be happening is we seem to be seeing some convergence between this startup community, but also a larger population of freelance workers. And increasingly, there's an opportunity, of course, for many startups who are looking for team members to invite some of those freelance workers who can end up becoming fully fledged members of their team. Equally, seeing some freelance members with very much an ambition to build their own team and set up their own startup. So on the team building side of it, I think startups are perhaps benefiting from that side of the movement. And very often, if you can find yourself in a co-working space rather than an incubator or an accelerator, then that's where those two different communities really come into contact at the moment.
I'll just very quickly add as well that building a team can be quite time-consuming as well, and it can be quite difficult to recruit people who are as passionate about the problem as you are, particularly if you're the one who's identified it, who's seen it, who's felt it in your gut that this needs to be fixed. So although a team is important and collaboration is important, I think once you do decide that this is something for you, you've checked out who else is doing things that may be similar, you've realized that your way is different enough, you can't perhaps team up or collaborate with a larger organization, that if you can't bring people on board that have the same passion as you and who believe in the thing that you're doing, and of course, the more people you bring on board too soon, you then start to have meetings to decide what to do, so it can actually slow things down. The best thing to do is just learn to do as much as you need to. So one of the tips I always give to people who are starting out is learn to do things that you can't afford to pay other people to do. But don't use the fact you haven't got a website to be a reason why you don't have a website. Get WordPress, spend the weekend, build a website. If you need an app, you can build an app. It's not that difficult. If you need to write a concept note or do whatever, then do it. One of the things I find, I get approached by a lot of younger people in particular who are looking to build ideas, and quite often they reach out for help a little bit too early. Certainly investors and the media and the whole social entrepreneurship movement, I think, warm slightly better to people who have shown they can take an idea to a certain level before they need huge amounts of help. And I know certainly for a fact that donors feel that way. So with FrontlineSMS, for example, I ran it for 2 years without any money. And that resonated with many people because it showed commitment, it showed an ability to do something without money, and it showed that I was actually able to and willing to learn to do things that I couldn't do. So team building is important, but it's not everything.
And I wonder, speaking about the desire to change, a lot of businesses out there already who recognize the great business opportunity to sort of get involved with sustainability, but also the absolute imperative. There's a near consensus that climate change is real. It is happening. We're already behind in terms of making a difference. We've known about these issues for a long time. We've sort of delayed. Can social entrepreneurs, and I'd love to hear your take on this, Lisa and Nicky, and the others as well, but how can social entrepreneurs and companies out there that already exist work together better? Ken talked about being able to make a difference with no funding. A lot of these big organizations and companies have a ton of resources that they could dedicate to this. So what are the best ways? What can big business essentially learn from social media who are sort of working on being operations?
Yeah.
Making a lot of difference.
I think that's. Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah.
Yep.
I think it's a great question. It's a question that is asked a lot. Why on earth would an entrepreneur have an opportunity to do something that's not just valuable to society, but possibly, you know, make a thriving company out of it, when we have much bigger, better resource companies out there who say that they are doing innovation, looking for opportunities? And it's a really interesting question. Why on earth would an entrepreneur with an idea, some passion, perhaps some team, perhaps a tiny amount of money, ever be able to compete with some of the big corporates? And that's when you start thinking, what is really distinctly entrepreneurial and what's the benefit of that? And I think some of the advantages, so this has been sort of looked at quite a lot, but entrepreneurs have a distinctive way of looking at the world, and they don't have to concern themselves with cannibalizing an existing business. But perhaps more importantly, what very often happens in an existing business is there's a top-down planned approach to doing things. And this is one of the things that big business have been learning from entrepreneurs, that when you're talking about genuine opportunity, unfortunately or fortunately, it also comes with uncertainty. And how do you really cope with uncertainty from a planning perspective? It's very challenging to do. And that's why the entrepreneurial method, as if we call it that, is fantastic for dealing with these genuine but uncertain opportunities, because they're talking about more trial and error, pivoting. We've been talking a lot about that today. So really trying to resolve some of that uncertainty. But with that comes another side of it, which is the ability not just to say, this is the world in which I live in, I'm going to react to what I see around me. Instead, the entrepreneurial sort of mindset is more about, okay, this is what I think we should be doing. How do I change the world to make that a reality, to really make it happen? So very much being proactive rather than reactive. And it's absolutely true. Big business have looked at entrepreneurs and said, how come, you know, these guys who've got less money than we do, fewer people, how come they're beating us in our own sector sometimes? And as an entrepreneur, you can very happily try and test your idea in a niche without attracting too much attention, and then when you're ready to go, you really do have the advantage and you're actually ahead of other organisations that perhaps are bigger and better resourced. But saying that, there are some big companies who are, you know, they really are taking some of these interesting ideas on how to be more entrepreneurial, how to spot opportunities, and work those opportunities until they do become fully realised, I guess, or business opportunities. So that's just my perspective of, you know, why on earth would an entrepreneur ever be able to even compete with some of these bigger companies?
John, that's a very wide and huge question. That, but take a bit of it. If we have a look at Unilever, and Unilever has done some very brave and bold things in the sustainability space. I think publicly stating a number of very measurable targets, I think was a very brave move, and I think it's a testament to the environment out there that our shareholders responded very positively to that, and then those targets are not separate from the day-to-day business. They're cascaded all the way down, right throughout the business. So, as Nicky was saying, you know, how do you get an employee to feel entrepreneurial and feel like they can do something? Well, number one, give them permission to do it. You know, a lot of corporates are, you will do X and you are only allowed to do X, and any time deviated from doing X is not celebrated, and so therefore you have to modify that X includes delivery against these broader objectives, and so we've it's amazing. I mean, I just look back, you know, sort of 5-6 years ago when you were trying to you know, persuade factory managers to run trials of new technologies and things like that, and it was, you know, they're wonderful people, but they're very busy people making very high quality product around the world, and to get people to innovate and experiment is time consuming, and so it's if you need the top down permission to experiment, and as Curt said, therefore the permission to fail. And that's okay. It is okay to spend time and energy trying something out, and then the result being it did not work. And that's a learning, and that's a good thing. So I think that's something that we've done really, really well. And then, as Nicky said, wanting to work with entrepreneurs and trying to find ways to work with entrepreneurs. I mean, corporates are huge. They have governance processes that make sure that we are very thoughtful. We're very considered in what we do and how we do it. So for us to suddenly radically change something would be risky, because we'd need to make sure we'd done all the health and safety checks on something. So you can imagine there's a corporate culture is one of, I'd love to change quickly, but oh my goodness, if we change without all the right thought happening, then that can end up actually doing more harm than good. So it's how do you get that entrepreneurial link in, and that's why a corporate venture house is fabulous. We've got our Foundry, which is another touch point for entrepreneurs, where people within Unilever can act as mentors to a startup community. And we run a big Go Global campaign where we introduce brands to startups. In a way that is where there's a translation service happening between the big corporate and the startup, because as any entrepreneur will tell you, the languages are pretty different, and it's always quite funny when a startup is talking to a brand manager and everyone agrees we're going to move this really quickly, and a brand manager thinking really quickly is probably talking about next year's plan and including it into next year's plan. And a startup talking really quickly is talking tomorrow, and they'll shake hands on the really quickly, and you need that translation service to explain that we potentially maybe are talking two different time frames here. So yeah, anyway.
I just wanted to throw one thing out there too. I mean, so for me, the first chance that I ever got to talk to a really, really big business was actually going to the Sustainable Living Awards in January in London and meeting all of you guys. And one of the things that was really cool for me is that my whole big issue that I first got involved with, like the first big picture issue that I got excited about, was actually oil palm. And I was into biofuels. My first project was all about biofuels. It was all about sustainable biofuels. And then we get this presentation by Paul Pullman, CEO of Unilever, about all the things that Unilever is doing to completely change how palm oil is grown around the world. And what was so cool for me about that was how, this idea that I was really excited about back in 2006, Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil Development. How do we actually grow palm oil in a way that doesn't completely destroy the planet? That all of a sudden, this first big company to really latch on to that is here presenting and talking to us about all the things that they're doing to push other companies, government, etc., to actually get involved and accept these standards. And so I think that there's kind of two directions that this place between startups and big companies can go. One is where a big company becomes the champion for an idea that a bunch of startups pushed. And that was in this case the palm oil example. You have all these small companies, you have small nonprofits, you have big nonprofits all pushing this idea for how can we do palm oil sustainably. And then one of the first big companies in the world just latch on and say, we're going to actually use our force to only buy from these companies and try to really buy from as well. And I thought that was incredible. And I think there's another direction that I haven't really heard anybody talk about, but that's how big companies can bring the things to startups. I think one of the biggest problems with social entrepreneurs right now is if you go and talk to the kids that are really excited about it, is they have a lot of really kind of lame ideas, like pretty boring standard, like, I want to do, I'm going to sell X thing and a percentage of the profits can go to charity. I mean, that's cool and all, but that's not like world game-changing stuff. But I think that what's really interesting is that at the really big corporate level, normally there's this understanding of how value chains work, how big structures of power work, how governments work, etc., that gives big companies a really good idea of what are those little things that if they got changed, would completely change how much. And they might say, we can't, we don't have the time, we don't have the energy to go change this little thing. But if somebody else could do it, it could completely change how we run business, how we do business. And I think that not only big companies scaling up, what little startups and little social entrepreneurs are doing is great, but also how can companies actually frame the problems and say, some social entrepreneur could go figure out X, Y, and Z, we could change everything. We can't do that, but we can at least frame the problem and give you some of the resources for it. And I think that's a whole new field that needs to open up. It's kind of like the idea of the X Prize, where a bunch of people come together and say, if somebody could do X, Y, and Z, we'll pay them $10 million. Well, I think the idea would be like, okay, if you can find a way that palm oil can be grown sustainably, then we will find a way to ratchet that up. Or if you could find a way that we can do fair trade in a way that's actually helping small farmers, we will ratchet that up. But like, frame the problem for how they come get involved, and we'll go, put that problem statement out there, let the social entrepreneurs do their thing and see who figures it out first. I think that could be really cool too.
Yeah. So
Curt, sorry, John.
Yeah, I was just going to say, there's something a huge demand for social change, international development, social progress generally. I think we sort of do need to work on the supply. And I know that Nicky works with innovation prizes. I know that Ken Banks traveled around the world. He was at sea with folks like Desmond Tutu, mentoring young entrepreneurs. So for the last 5 minutes here as we wrap up, maybe we could just go around and what are the next steps? Lisa, you even helped to identify those little things that Curt talked about, those little things that people need to focus on and pick on. To take a good idea, maybe potentially pouring this over to the next level. I'd love to hear a little bit from each of you. What advice would you give a young entrepreneur? Perhaps what advice would you give your younger self? What can you really do to make a difference and take an idea that you have from this is wrap up.
Okay, I'll have a go at that one. So from the advice to a younger version of me, given that I did try a couple of startups and failed miserably, I think this is, and unfortunately, being a bit of a dinosaur, it was before the age of internet. But I think the real advice is, I think a point that Ken raised earlier is know where you're good, know where you can learn so that you can fill the gaps of your own knowledge gaps, but then go out and seek experts to fill in your knowledge gaps and get some people with scars on their shoulders, the been there, done that scars that can help you through some of the very depressing moments that you will have when you think, I just can't do this anymore. It's just overwhelming. It isn't. You just need to pick yourself back up, and having a go-to person for that is just phenomenal. So that's the advice to entrepreneurs. Stick at it. It is possible to get through, but get yourself some nice advice. From the corporate side of the point of view about what can corporates bring to entrepreneurs, I think we haven't been brilliant at it, but I think we're getting a whole lot better. And I think the journey really looks promising going forward as to how that interaction just can get better and better. Curt, I love that Curt said, can you please write a problem statement down as part of the Foundry that we only just launched, so it's only a month old, but that's exactly what we're doing. We've started in the digital world, the digital marketing space, with a list of 6 problem statements. And we are brainstorming internally to make sure that when we launch our sustainable problem statements, that they are worded in the right kind of way to get the right kind of response. Because of course, we want to generate activity in the right kind of way. So Curt, that was, yeah, exactly. So that's one of the things we're doing, and we'll report back at maybe another Google session as to how it's all worked out.
Well, I'm happy to dive in just a few very quick, short snips of I think what advice I would give, but again based on my own experience, but also based on the experience of many people that I've that I've met over the years. I say don't be in a hurry. Change doesn't happen quickly, although sometimes we see social change happening very quickly. Look at the Arab Spring and so on. But generally speaking, it's a long game. So you're not going to fix big problems in a day and then move on to something else the next day. So don't be in a hurry. Don't assume you need money to grow either. I think that's a very commonly made mistake, that money is helpful, but sometimes money can be a hindrance, particularly depending when you look for it. I think learning when to say no. So remind yourself precisely what it is that you're looking to solve or fix and stick with it. Say no to things that might detract you from your path. It's sometimes difficult to do that because you feel you're losing opportunities, but you're better off doing one thing incredibly well rather than doing 10 things averagely well. So managing expectations is absolutely important. Avoiding politics. Don't get dragged down by the politics of the sector that you're working in. There's politics everywhere, and I've met many people who spend the majority of their time justifying their work and fighting politics than actually doing the work. So stay focused and let the other people just do the talking. We've already had the learning to do things you can't afford to pay other people to do. That's, I think, key as well. And I'll say the final one is just remember the bigger picture. When I was working in Nigeria, I wrote on the wall when I was working in a primate sanctuary there, because there were so many things that were detracting me from the work I was out there to do. Just remind yourself each day what you're doing and what your ultimate goal is. Maybe it's a photograph that will bring back a memory of a trip or a person that you met which started you on your journey. But just make sure that every day you remind yourself of your mission, what it is you're trying to achieve. And when you make decisions, you can ask yourself, does that decision get me any closer to the point I want to get there? And if it doesn't get you any closer, then perhaps you shouldn't do it. I'll probably leave it at that.
Thanks, Ken. Nicky, we have you back now. If you missed the question, we're just trying to offer some last-minute advice here to young entrepreneurs, how they can make a difference. Perhaps, with your experience in clean tech, because we have our eyes and ears on sort of sustainability issues. Do you have any emerging sectors that young entrepreneurs should look to make a difference in? Any sort of advice from you would be great, and then we'll kick it to Curt and wrap it.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yeah,
I'm now on a different computer, so it's good to see the Google Hangouts working as it should. Yeah, there's absolutely some emerging trends, and one of the areas that's of great interest to me is the idea of the smart home and the smart grid. I think there's some very interesting things going on in that space. And I think so I've always had a foot in sort of the clean tech, high growth side of things, as well as the social enterprise things. And I think both need to learn from each other, actually. Some of the interesting trends in social enterprise, of course, is people trying to take different kinds of waste and turn that into some kind of product. So I think the area of 3D printing actually has applications in both worlds, in the social enterprise as well as clean tech. So some very interesting trends, and while we've all been saying how hard it is, I think it's worth finishing with saying how many opportunities there are as well. And actually that's the difficulty in this space. There are sometimes so many ideas, it's knowing where to start. And the trick there is to understand what your competences are and who's in your network, and really trying to sort of balance those against the idea that you want to pursue. But if I just finish with probably my greatest advice, because I think people are the most important aspect of this, is that when you create an organization, it's always a danger when you have an individual entrepreneur making it about their own ego. In some ways, it's much more helpful if you start treating your organization like another person, and then you really try and look after that person. And that's certainly, I mean, I've done that in my own ventures, and some of the successful entrepreneurs I know, they've certainly not made it all about themselves. Instead, they've done everything that they can to really support and help the company thrive as almost a separate individual. And in that sense, it's almost your goal to remove yourself from being a critical part in the equation. So yes, I hope that there's lots of people listening who are sort of brimming with ideas, and never be afraid to talk about your ideas. I know people worry about patenting and those kinds of things, but actually in general, the only way that you refine your idea is by talking about it.
Great advice. Curt, over to you.
So I guess there's two things that I want to say. One is really echoing Nicky. I think that it's absolutely important that you find a community to help you and a community to help the idea, so that there is some separation between you and the idea that you're trying to do. Because I think ultimately, as a social entrepreneur, your goal is that you fix a big social problem. And that's not about your organization succeeding. That's not about how people remember your organization. It's not about you. It's about that problem. And so I think that finding that separation is really key. And I think the best way to do it, or at least for me, because at the beginning, I was really young, and founders and stuff and all that was definitely really prescient. Read the really good books on leadership, Good to Great and stuff like that, books that really actually make you think about what an organization's culture should be, because that's way more important than you. It's that whole entity that you're trying to build. And find the mentors who can actually help you do that, who've done it before. And you don't need a lot of mentors. I think the world will give you lots of cheerleaders, but finding a few people who you actually can tell absolutely everything to. I have a couple people on my board who there's no hold barred. I'll tell them all the worst things that are going on, and they help you actually get some perspective on that and help you focus on the ways to get around them. So, find a community of a couple people that you really trust who can actually help guide you through that process and take that challenge on. I think the second piece, and I think this is one thing that's definitely kind of is lacking in a lot of social entrepreneurs, and it's really important. I think that specifically to social entrepreneurship is this question about systematic fixes. It's not just about I personally, my organization has helped X amount of people. It's if you look at how the world is working right now in this specific field, there's this problem with this field. If it's food aid, you could identify there's this inefficiency here, or causing more harm than good here. But it's asking those questions about how the system actually works now, and then figuring out what is the thing that we can do to fix it. A really good example is medical tourism, right? So you have all these developing countries that don't have really good medical services, and you get to people in really rural areas, and you have all these gringos or Europeans or whoever who goes down there and tries to, for a week give off free medical services. And you look at that system and you say, this system is going to be in place forever. It's not making the government get any better. It's not making, it's dealing with some needs, but those needs are going to keep coming up. And I think what a social entrepreneur does is look and say, okay, how can we change how this works to actually be able to solve the deeper problem? And I think that, those are the two forces you have to balance. On one hand, as a young social entrepreneur, you want to make the most amount of good possible. You want it to be now. But then you also have to balance that by saying, okay, but how do we actually, in that process, fix the deeper problem? So balancing those two things, immediate impact versus the systematic problem, that's really the space of a social entrepreneur. You have to balance that short term and that long term. And that's really hard, and a lot of people I know kind of go one way or the other. You're really focused on the system, you're not doing anything now, or you're really focused on it now, and you're not thinking about the system. And to have those both in your head at the same point, that's really hard, but I think that's what it would take, and I think that would be my advice to myself.
Great, thanks so much. 2 points here just to wrap up. First, if you have questions for any of our panel, Curt, Ken, Lisa, or Nicky, you can ask them on Twitter. Just tag your tweet with the hashtag SustLiving, SustLiving. And if you have any ideas, we'd love to hear your ideas. Health and well-being, reducing environmental impact, a more equitable workplace. If you're even changing the way consumers interact, we'd love to hear about it. So enter those ideas at changemakers.com/sustliving2014. Check them out. We'll get some feedback. So get those in. Otherwise, a big thanks to our panel here again today, and hopefully we'll get to chat again sometime soon. Thanks, folks.